Boston Redevelopment Authority. As you know, tonight we're here to kick off the Rose Kennedy Greenway Ramp Parcel Study. Before we get into the meat of it, I'd like to just do a couple housekeeping items. First, just so everybody's aware, Matt Conti of NorthEndWaterfront.com is recording the meeting. Thank you, Matt. Additionally, I'd like to just notice that Maria Popolo is here from Senator Petroselli's office, and James Chan as well from Councilor Linehan's office. Is there anybody else from any other elected official, like representative here? No? I think Representative Mikowitz is on his way. So he's going to get an introduction to the meeting. Anyway, do we have any members of the press present also? Thank you, Representative Mikowitz. Who gets an introduction at every meeting, right? I'd also like to note that Laura Jasinski is here from the Rose Kennedy Greenway Conservancy. We're thrilled that we're going to be working with the Greenway forward on this, so it's great that she's here tonight. As you know, this is a joint planning effort between MassDOT and the BRA, so you'll see a lot of familiar faces on our project team. I'll just go around, actually I think everybody at the table can just introduce themselves. We'll start with Matthew Littell.
Matthew Littell, I'm principal at UTO. We are working with HDR on the planning.
Rock Marcel from HDR, part of the team.
John Romano from MassDOT, Legislative and Community Affairs.
Bill Tuttle, MassDOT Real Estate.
These guys.
All right. Good evening, I'm Mark Ravelisi. I'm the MassDOT District 6 Projects Engineer.
Good evening, Ellen Ramirez from MassDOT.
Good evening, Steve McLaughlin, MassDOT Grids Project Management Section.
Good evening, Stephanie Canizio, MassDOT Environmental.
Hi, I'm Lara Morita, Deputy Director for Community Planning.
I have to sit up in my seat. I don't belong to anybody.
Sure you do.
I belong to the seat.
Let's actually agree we move to this next slide. So, for the study, this is going to be a tripartite process following the joint development protocol established during the planning of the Central Artery Tunnel project. So the 3 circles represent MassDOT, the BRA, and all of you, the public. We're really excited to see so many familiar faces in the room tonight. And I think at this point, well, actually, one thing, as we move through the presentation, if you could save your questions or comments till the end, because we do have some time in there for public comments, and we'll be able to get to everybody. It looks like, we have a pretty good size group. So I'll next turn it over to John Romano.
Hi everyone, thank you all for being here tonight. It's great to see so many familiar faces, some people I haven't seen in a while, but a lot of us have worked together over the years with the big dig in the Central Artery and have worked on these parcels and all of the other parcels in the downtown. And on behalf of Secretary Davey and Lauren, on behalf of the mayor, we are excited to get this thing kicked off and rolling. The purpose of the study is MassDOT and the BRA are required through MEPA to cover, and I say cover, there is no official definition of cover, but we are required to cover parcels 6, 12, and 18, the 3 ramp parcels in the downtown. Here's kind of an aerial view of them. There's 6, 12, and 18. There's a different view of it. Go to the next one. And again, a little better view. I think we all, at least most of us, know these parcels. They're very near and dear to us. They are pretty much 3 major unfinished parcels as part of the project. Parcel 18 being the southernmost by Rose Wharf, parcel 12 over by Commercial Street and Faneuil Hall area, and parcel 6 over by Cross Street, Endicott Street, and the Haymarket Government Center, Haymarket Train and Bus Station, excuse me. So we're gonna have the team go through a pretty intensive slide presentation here, take you way back to the beginning and kind of bring you up to the present. The purpose at the end of the day here is for us to try to come up with a good plan of what we're going to determine to be the cover, whichever that may be, whether it be a literal cover, a building, or landscaping, or screening of some sort of all three of the parcels. Tonight is the very first meeting. We're planning on probably a 6 to 9 month, maybe a little bit longer, planning process to go along with this. Towards the end, we'll go over the schedule. I kind of say, you know, buckle your seatbelt, stay with us. This is going to be a fun ride, and I think at the end of the day, we're going to come up with something good for all three of these parcels individually and then collectively to fit in with the entire corridor. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bill Tuttle.
Okay.
Repeat of the presentation.
Thank you. It is great to see so many familiar faces out there. Again, talking about ramps. As John said, where we start here is that we have an environmental commitment, and we is both Mass DOT and the City of Boston, because we are joint proponents on the land use plan that was adopted with the Central Artery Project. That land use plan and the commitments that went with it developed out of a several-year planning process in the late 80s, early 90s, culminating in terms of a commitment in November 1990 with the final supplemental environmental impact report and the certificate from the Secretary of Environmental Affairs at the time, which says, you probably can't read it, it says highway ramps on parcels 6, 12, and 18 must be covered to mitigate their impacts on the surface environment. DPW, to which Mass DOT is the successor in interest, must use every effort to secure federal highway funding to finance these activities. The rest of it is about something else. Absent federal funding, it will nevertheless be the responsibility of the DPW to finance these activities. That is the meat, but that's pretty much the entirety of the commitment. It doesn't really go into any more detail than that. Subsequent to that, there was some additional planning that was done. Whoops. And there was another MEPA certificate filed. It's actually not it was just an ENF, an environmental notification form, on which the city and the state were both co-proponents. And a certificate issued on that added one encouragement, not requirement, but encouragement that if parcel 12 were developed as a building, that it be kept, that there be a sort of visual and pedestrian access maintained through the center of the parcel. So that's really all the commitment says. It doesn't give us a lot of clarity. As John said, cover is not defined very clearly, and it's something we've tried to work on over time. A couple of other key things about the commitment. Let's see what I have here. It's very important to understand this is not, the coverage commitment does not have to do with air quality, and it does not have to do with noise. Both air quality and noise impacts of the highway, as it is now, were passed and cleared. Covering the ramps is purely visual and aesthetic and just sort of pedestrian environment mitigation. It is not about air quality. Just want to be clear about that because there was always some question about that in the past. In the BRA planning process that culminated in the Boston 2000 plan, parcels 6 and 12 were identified for future buildings, and parcel 18 was always identified as an open space parcel. Following on that, well, getting a little bit ahead, we'll go through parcel by parcel in a second. Where we are now is many of you know, we have tried to find building developers. We worked with a couple, actually 3, one on each parcel, and in the end they all withdrew their proposals, partially because of the downturn in the economy, partially because they were all nonprofits and couldn't afford to do it. That puts us back in a position of how are we going to meet this commitment going forward, which is why we're here, to basically restart that conversation. Clearly the initial idea that we all had back in the 80s and early 90s that this would be, on 6 and 12 anyway, there would be buildings that would meet that commitment, has not worked, and so we need to sort of push the restart button, which is why we're here. I just want to walk through a little bit of history on each of the parcels, and I'm going to take them to, you can't read that, and frankly, neither can I.
But we will post the
Yeah.
presentation to the project website. The web address is listed again, but it's posted on the VRA's website, so if you go to the VRA website, you'll be able to find it.
But this gives you a little more detailed summary of the timeline of the history that got us where we are today, and I'll walk through parcel by parcel. In 2000, when we were in a position of deciding whether to build open space covers or trust that we could in fact find a building developer for parcels 6 and 12, we put out a request for interest, and we got responses back. Responses good enough, we thought, to pursue the building option, which is what had been intended in the planning and the zoning. On parcel 6, we subsequently put out an RFP, request for proposals. We eventually got 2 proposals, I think it's 2, possibly 3. We ended up picking the YMCA, the YMCA of Greater Boston, to develop it for the use it was originally intended for, which was a community center and recreational facility. We went through a fair amount of work with them. We actually entered into a development agreement with them. There was legislatively set aside funding that would have helped cover that ramp, those ramps. In the end, however, they still could not afford to do it, and we could not figure out a way to get it to work for them. So they withdrew, and that withdrawal again happened pretty much during the recession, when most of the major nonprofits sort of had to take a step back, as did most private developers. To give you an idea of what they were talking about, though, here's a site plan showing you how the building would grade. Large block at the top would have been, I think, a swimming pool and a gym. Here's what it would have looked like at the lower levels in conjunction with the parks next door on parcel 8. I'll point here. So here's parcel 6. This is what it would have looked like on the very first level. This is parcel 8 and 10, the North End parks. This is what it would have looked like looking from parcel 8, looking north. And these are views from the sides, the long ones are from the sides. The lower one here, that it would be the view from the north end. This would be, did I get that right? Yes. And this would be the view looking from the government center garage, except that you'd have been a lot closer to it, so you never would have been able to get that long a view. This is a view again from the north end parks, and this is what you'd look at as you drove into the ramps. An angled view, again, north end is on your right, the YMCA there. So we did enter into an agreement. We had a fair amount of discussions over, goodness, I think almost 5 years with the YMCA, and we got very close, but in the end, they couldn't get there. And even with the subsidy from the state legislature, they couldn't get there. So they withdrew. Parcel 18, there had in the meantime been expressed an interest by the new Center for Arts and Culture in locating on parcel 18, which had not been designated as a building parcel originally. Scoot up a little bit. Here is parcel 18 between Rose Wharf here and International Place. Because of that interest, we put out another RFP. The Boston Museum project again submitted on this parcel as they had on 6. And the new Center for Arts and Culture submitted, and a third proposal was also submitted. In the end, we selected the new Center for Arts and Culture. We again went through a process with them of entering into a development agreement. We negotiated the development agreement. We started work on it, and when the recession hit, they pulled back and said they couldn't do it, and withdrew their proposal. So, quick walkthrough of what they've been talking about on 18. Oops. This is looking south with Rose Wharf on your left. It's a very sort of prismatic, crystal-like building by Danielle Leedskin. And this is their pretty view at night. This is what it would have looked like slicing through it. The ramps underneath it. And end views, the plaza view at the southern end, I believe. No, that's the northern end, I'm sorry. Right in front of the wood in the plaza, right in front of Rose Wharf. The Boston Museum also proposed on parcel 18. They got a great deal of support for what their use was, but the general feeling coming from the neighborhood group that was gathered to comment on it, from the VRA and from at the time Mass Pike, was that it was a good proposal but the wrong parcel. That the new Center for Arts and Culture was a better proposal for that parcel. Coming out of that, and this is the the proposal that the museum put in on parcel 18, which had this one is by Moshe Safdie, sort of curving semi-cylinder, glass semi-cylinder, sort of sitting on top of a thing, sort of a bump that went up over the ramps. Coming out of that process, they had garnered enough goodwill and respect for their proposal that a decision was taken not to do an RFP for parcel 12, but to simply designate them for parcel 12, the Boston Museum project, based on their parcel 18 submission, which we did. And we again started work with them. And this was how Moshe Safdie adapted that same design, same notion, how he adapted it onto parcel 12. North end on the right, Clinton, you're looking down Clinton Street on the left there. And the sort of curving form there is part of the museum, and the sort of swooping grass there actually has a museum program under it as well. They proposed. Same problem. When push came to shove in the recession, they did not have the money to finance this. That is a particularly hard parcel to cover, as we found out when they started to dig into it. So they also withdrew. And then they proposed on parcel 9 where they were not selected. Because again, we didn't think it was the best proposal. So that's sort of the history. Let me just check my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. I should say on parcel 12, there had been an interim sort of planning process between the RFI that we did and when we named the museum project. Both a community group with funding from Mass Pike, I would gather, to hire a consultant, did some planning on what an open space stack might look like there, or a building project, and CAT project staff had also looked at possible building and park alignments as well. Suffice it to say that we never quite got to agreement on that, and in the interim, the museum project came along and they were named for that parcel. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren.
I'm going to get the planning context. This is a great slide. Most of us are probably familiar with these various stages of the central artery and Greenway, from the elevated highway still in existence to the construction phase, and now to the park system that we all enjoy. There's been a lot of planning done over the last, I don't know, 3, maybe 4 decades. Some of it done by the city, some of it done by the state, some of it done by other interested stakeholders. But the most important, probably as it relates to the actual park parcels, was the Boston 2000 plan. The Boston 2000 plan included plans for the parks themselves, but also a boulevard plan, a housing plan, a district by district plan, and also established parcel by parcel uses. In turn, it eventually led, actually quite quickly thereafter, led to the Article 49 in the Boston Zoning Code, which was approved by the Zoning Commission in 1991 and provides basically the dimensional regulations, but also urban design guidelines for each of the parcels. Here we've got a chart showing just the general uses, height, lot coverage, FAR. I'll just talk about the uses. Parcel 6, recreation, open space, and community uses are permitted. The height there is up to 55 feet. Parcel 12, residential uses, community uses, cultural uses, and local retail and service uses. Also capped at 55 feet. And then parcel 18, which is divided into a northern and southern portion, but very similar uses on each. Urban plaza, open space, seasonal and festival uses, cultural uses and restaurant uses on the north side, and then open space, arboretum, community uses, and restaurant uses on the south side. Both of the north and south parcels of parcel 18 are capped at 35 feet. And the reason for this is that originally the parcel was an open space parcel. The only buildings that were envisioned were kiosks, small kiosks that wouldn't extend beyond 35 feet. Most recently, we looked at the edges of the parks in the Greenway District Planning Study, taking a look at all the parcels adjacent to the Greenway and how we should help as a city guide the future planning for those parcels that at one point looked, at the elevated highway and now looked into a future park system. Now it's time to reconsider the ramp parcels. In a sense, this study will be the culmination of the planning for the Greenway corridor. This is our opportunity to change and complete the way the parks work and are linked together. With several years of successful growth along the Greenway, we now really have a chance to look at these with fresh eyes, and I think that the time is really good for that. I'm glad in a way that we waited a little while on this. Determining the future condition of the ramp parcels is really going to give us a chance to sew everything together. And we don't have any set conclusions about what the ultimate configuration of the ramp parcels is going to be, but we do want to find a creative and sustainable solution for the city, for the Greenway Conservancy, for everybody involved. So I'm going to turn it over to Brock, who's going to go into far more detail on the conditions of each of the parcels.
Not that much detail.
Oh.
Try not to bore you all. You've heard the planning aspects from Lauren. You've heard the history from Bill, and that's a great starting point. All I'm going to get into with you tonight is a little bit of detail on each of these parcels, if I can hit the right button. Each of these parcels, we're going to drill down a little bit into each of them so you can have a better understanding, for those of you who don't already know, about some of the physical constraints that the design team is ultimately going to have to deal with, and what's going to form what may be able to be done on these parcels. So starting with parcel 18, going from south to north. This is a view of one of the original maps, or this map over here that you see on the back of the wall. And this just defines what Lauren was referring to as a split between the southern portion of parcel 18 and the northern portion of parcel 18. Basically split where the ramp diverts here. For the area, this is the financial district here, right across from Rose Wharf here. A little happy with, and hopefully what you see with the picture is a real-time view of what that looks like today with the park in place and how plush it is and how wonderful it is to actually walk through that area on the ramps. It's interesting because as we've been walking around through here and walking through that park in that area, it's very difficult to actually feel that you have ramps on either side of you. So the landscape that's there has done a really nice job at masking a lot of that. This is a neat picture I like. It's a historical view of as the RFPs that Bill was talking about were being developed, and it's gives you a nice view of what the elevated artery used to look like going through this area right in front of Rose Wharf. Just a nice historical perspective. Some of the specifics, there's going to be some overlapping here with what Lauren talked about a little bit with the zoning requirements and the zoning regulations that were established under Article 49, but I kind of wanted to hit on it a little bit more and help people understand the limitations or what the plan was for these parcels moving forward. So the total parcel area is about 85,000 square feet or about 1.9 acres. Under Article 49 zoning, which is what Lauren was talking about, is zoned for urban plaza open space. That was the original intent. The desired use open park area. Key considerations that the design team is ultimately going to have to consider is going to be these vertical clearance. And you're going to see this is a constant theme as we go through these things. We're looking at how to develop over the ramps. Major considerations are going to be vertical requirements, vertical clearance requirements for trucks and vehicles to actually come out of the tunnels. Associated with that, air quality, lighting, ventilation, and sight distance. Now the 14.5 feet is kind of critical because that's not just to the top of the vehicle. That has to include all clearances once you come down from the ceiling and include all the ventilation and the lighting and any of the signage. That 14.5 feet has to include all of that stuff, clear distance from the bottom of the surface to the bottom of the sign so that vehicles can get through there without hitting anything. Signing systems, the control systems, the electronic control systems. There's also major utility corridors that cross along Atlantic Purchase and Oliver Street, basically bounding this parcel that lead to some pretty significant constraints as far as when you're opening up the street in that area. View corridor has been established out to Rose Wharf, as you all know. It's this area here that's defined. So that's a limiting factor of what can be developed in this area. And then the tunnels and the ramps are designed for low building, 3-floor, and deck structures at the portals. So when the original designs were being put together, the designs for the tunnels, for the boat sections and the tunnels were put together assuming that there was going to be something built on top of that. So it's ready to handle that load. This is a section view. If you slice right down the middle of the tunnels and the ramps as you were driving along them, this is what you would see, and hopefully you understand the cartoon characters that I put in there. And so that shows you the truck coming out of the tunnel and cars coming out of the tunnel. And the whole intent of what this slide is trying to show you is this red line that comes up here. That establishes what that 14.5 foot clearance is intended to that's that envelope that nothing can go on top. Nothing can encroach in that area to allow vehicles to get out of the tunnels. The significance of that, as you look at photos, is that any development that's considered has to be well above this line, so that traffic flow is not impeded. And that was a big thing that has been considered by a lot of the building development alternatives that have been considered. Everything has to go higher, and that's the reason why. Is that you can't have something down here so that as a truck or a vehicle is coming out of the tunnel, they're scraping the roof, scraping the roof, scraping the roof, and then the roof is gone off the truck. So the whole point is that all of those developments have to go up high enough so that vehicles can continue to get through there unobstructed, including any of the signage that goes with the highway and the lighting that goes with the highway. Now, if you were to slice through that parcel from south to north, if you're standing on that parcel wondering what's underneath your feet, this is it. So these are section views walking south to north through parcel 18 that would show you where the tunnels sit underground and where the ramps are above ground. And as you go south to north along that parcel, the ramps drop down. Ramps drop down from what we call as a boat section here. These boat sections here that go deeper and deeper underground. So the challenge in trying to develop a parcel like this is you have to maintain that 14.5 feet over this, and what you can see from that is that any building development has to be done. It's going to be done up here to maintain that clearance over the ramps. Already undercover. So these section views just walk through the parcel from south to north. So as you can see, as you progress from A to B to C to D, E, and F, that just walks you through the parcel and shows you how the ramps dive down into the ground here, here, and ultimately here. These are just views of parcel 18 on Seaport Boulevard, looking towards Rose Wharf. This is walking through the park from south. Nice vegetation, very well masked. You really don't get any idea that there are ramps on either side of you. The only place where you really get an indication of a ramp coming out of the ground is here, where this area had to remain open for the hydrant stand. Now we're going to talk a little bit about parcel 12, and there's going to be a lot of similar themes here as we walk through this. Everything that I really just talked about in parcel 18 is going to be very similar here. So as you know, parcel 12 is here. It sits right alongside Quincy Market, right alongside the north end. You can see the outline here, this red line. That defines what the parcel is, and also pictured over here. So the tunnel exit, northbound off-ramp here, and the southbound off-ramp here. What's interesting about this parcel is how close the ramps are. And if you look at how close they are, very unlike parcel 18, where there's actually room between the ramps, where that walkway was constructed and there was nice landscaping that was built between the ramps. Here you don't have that opportunity because it's very confined, it's very constricted. You really can't do anything between the parcels. And that's posed some problems for pedestrian access back and forth, north and south. So, some of the criteria for just some information. Total parcel area, 51,000 square feet, or about 1.2 acres. The Article 49 zoning calls for recreation, open space. The zoning allows for a building. Allowable uses, residential, community, facility, commercial, and business. Hopefully this coincides with the table you put up more. Key considerations. Well, let me go back and identify this. Here, this is parcel 12. This is the parking garage where the Hard Rock Cafe is. And the cross street sits here. So vertical clearances, just like we talked about on the previous parcel, 14.5 feet, all of that stuff still applies. Air quality, lighting, ventilation, sight distance, the signing systems, all of that still applies. Similar to parcel 18, there's a major utility crossing that goes east-west across the corridor like this. It's fairly wide, I think it's 50 or 60 feet in width, and it has basically everything underground that is needed there for utilities, major utilities in a city like Boston. Similar to parcel 18, there's a view corridor that's been established here along the southern portion of the corridor that looks towards Commercial Street. So there's a restriction on what can be built on that parcel. And similarly here, the tunnel ramps were designed for future loading, a 5-story building. However, we understand that the southbound off-ramp, which is this one, was not designed to withstand that loading. So that's one of the restrictions that will have to be considered as the parcel is developed, whether it's a building or a park or whatever. I'm sorry? The southbound off-ramp, I hit the right button. The southbound off-ramp was not designed for building loads, to accept building loads. Southbound off-ramp. So again, you get the section view looking through the ramps and the tunnels as you're driving through. And same thing here, you have that 14.5-foot clearance envelope that everything would have to be built above if it was to be developed as a building parcel. Same thing here, 14.5-foot clearance. So it gives you an idea that everything would have to be above this, which puts it considerably higher than the grade that's out there. And similar to the last ones that I showed you for parcel 12, here's the tunnels underground. So as you're standing up on the surface here, all the tunnels are underground. Shows you the configuration of the ramps.
The only thing I would add, Brock, is when you say building over, it's anything built over it. So if there's an open space deck, it has to comply with the same clearance requirements, not just a building with people occupying it. Any structure.
Anything that would cover the ramps has to be up at that elevation.
No problem.
So again, slicing through the site, through the parcel from south to north, this shows you the configuration at various stages through the parcel of where the ramps and the surface roads and the tunnels would be. You know, so as we look to develop these parcels, these are all things that have to be considered. It's not just what you're looking at on the surface, but the engineers, the designers have to consider everything that's underground as well, from utilities to tunnels, soils. And just photos as we go along. This is the southern end of the parcel. Greenway folks working, make it all pretty. View along the ramps, this is northeast at northbound off-ramp. And this is looking north from Commercial Street along Cross. That's the fence line with the artwork hanging off of it. Just another view looking northeast from the southbound off-ramp. Yeah, that's me.
And one should not stand on the ramp like that.
And I was told I shouldn't be up there, and I
That's true.
I didn't take that picture, Matt took that picture. That's not me jogging. That's just a nice view looking southeast. Now the last one, parcel 6, you all know is up the northern end up here. It's a very different parcel, very different constraints. That's this area outlined here. And you know, as you all know, there's very, very little land to be developed there. Basically, the entire parcel is covered by ramps that would have to be, it's encompassed by ramps that would have to be covered, and again, covered at a higher elevation. So here's the outline and plan view. And you can see all of these yellow areas, all the southbound and northbound ramps. So there's really very little land available to do anything with. So basically, the entire parcel would have to be covered to do anything with that lot. Just other views looking into the ramp portals here and here from different directions. And again, this is Government Center Garage here, full-pitch triangle. This is another one of the historical views that we got out of the RFPs, and Bill tells me that he's the one that sketched in this nice little blob that defines what the parcel definition is, but that's plotted on top of the old elevated artery, which that's for some nice perspective when you really look at what's there today versus what used to be. So again, some interesting information. The parcel area, 40,000 square feet, it's the smallest of them, 0.9 acres plus or minus. It was zoned for passive recreation and open space. The zoning does allow for a building. Community facility, recreational use. All the clearances that we talked about still apply: vertical clearance, air quality, lighting, ventilation. Major utility corridor here, going basically from east to west across the parcel. Goes above the tunnel, underneath the ramps. Yeah. Site distance is a concern as you come out of the tunnels looking at the signage. Now in 1998, there was a ramp cover study that was done to help define what could be designed on that parcel. Out of that came some defined loading scenarios, and there were a couple of theoretical designs that were done. One was a park deck, and the other one was a 5-story building. What did those look like, you might ask? This is a theoretical building that was designed. And you can see the 5 different stories, all the 5 different stories. This is the 14.5-foot clearance envelope that we've talked about. And you can see that the entire building, all of the deck floors, sit above that to allow for continuous passage of vehicles underneath. So when you look at that in section, this is what the building looked like, a 5-story building. Now what's interesting about this is when you consider the 14.5-foot clearance that has to be designed into that clearance for the vehicles coming out. So here's the ramps, and if you were to completely cover those ramps at the surface level, you basically have to come up like this to this first level. So you're looking at about 15 to 20 feet here from the surface level up to that elevation on this side and this side. So again, you have about 15 to a 20-foot wall here from the surface level to the first level of the building that's being proposed here. Tunnels underneath, northbound, southbound, and then the utility corridor that we've talked about is right down here. So a lot of different constraints on that parcel to consider. Similarly, the park deck that was considered looks something like this. So you have north is on this side, south is on this side. These are the southbound ramps, northbound ramps, and the green area was a park deck that was designed. It didn't cover all of the ramps. It covered a portion of it. And I'll show you a section that cuts through the middle of that to show you what that looked like. And similar to the other things that we've talked about, there's the elevation issue that you have to consider, the clearance envelope to get vehicles out of the ramps. And that's what that looked like. So here's the concept that was designed. And again, you have the 14.5-foot clear coming out of the ramps, plus whatever clearance would be required for signage and ventilation and lighting. And that basically dictates that that deck would have to be elevated like so, 15 to 20 feet above those ramps. And here's just some pictures of the entrance portal. So we'd be talking about, elevating some 14.5 feet up here and basically elevating as you go through that. As the ramp comes up, actually, I thought I had a different picture of that. All right, I won't bore you with that. So you get a sense for as the ramps converge with the ground on the outside, that deck is going to have to come up. There's some more pictures going down the other side. Here you can see it a little bit better as the ramp comes up out of the ground, converging with the ground out here. And so you can see that as a result, any deck that is put up is going to have to be up in this area to keep that clearance envelope free. These are just other views. This is looking north from southbound surface artery. And just different views looking northwest from Sudbury Cross. And with that, I'm going to turn it over back to John.
Thank you, Rob. Just one thing I want to add to some part of Rock's presentation. Actually, I want to acknowledge Nicole Leo from Mayor Walsh's office has joined us, so Nicole, thank you. Is that, so, we showed views of parcel 18 and, it kind of works really nice now and there's a pocket. We don't necessarily need to change that. I just want to put that out there. It doesn't need to be changed. We're looking at everything, but you don't need to go rip up something that works pretty well. So that's just one point. The other point is, as Rock was going through his description, and as Bill kind of jumped in there, on parcel 6 and 12, although they were designated as building or development sites, we don't need to necessarily end up with a building on it. Okay, that's what we're here to relook at. We're not here to say that was the history, to show you what's there, what's in the zoning. If we, at the end of the day, have to go to MEPA with a notice of project change to the surface plan, not to the project, to say we're going to do X at parcel 6 instead of what it says there, that's what we're here to determine. So please don't leave this meeting here tonight thinking we have to just rip up the park on 18 or we have to build a building on parcel 12 or 6. That's not the case. Okay, we're here to relook at this. So I just want to make sure that people have that as they're thinking about this over the summer. Our next public meeting is going to be in late September. We don't have an exact date yet, but it'll probably be right near the end. We will get that out to people. Make sure you signed in. We will get that information out to you. When we come back in September, we will have a plan of meetings going forward. We expect every 4 to 6 weeks roughly through the fall, and we will have that laid out when we come in September. So we won't go meeting to meeting. You will get a schedule of the next set of meetings and the locations that we're going to have them. That has not yet to be determined. We'll take questions at the end. That hasn't been determined yet, but we will get that out, and we'll get you that September meeting, but then by September we will actually have a full-scale plan so you can lay that out. Yes. I'm sure that'll make everybody's life easier, knowing when the meetings actually happen. Public comment. So we're going to do this in 2 sections. We're going to ask first that if you have any technical questions or any clarifying questions on the presentation. We'll go to the audience once. I'm going to go left to right, front to back. Okay, raise your hand. I'll call on you, but you don't have to jump out of your seat. If you're on the far right, I'll get to you, I promise. After that, we will then come back and we will take comments, thoughts, ideas, desires, hopes, or what people think could go on. You don't need to get it all out to us tonight. The last slide that we'll show, I'll actually put that up now. My email address and Lauren's email address are there. You can email us comments, thoughts, ideas, etc. And we have over the summer for people to think of that. When we come back in September, the first meeting will be not exactly the same as this one, but we want to hit the ground running. But there will be plenty of opportunity to continue to give us your feedback, your thoughts and ideas. So I don't want people to think that if I don't say it now, they're never going to hear from me. That's not the case. The public comment and input is very critical to this process. So with that, I'm going to literally start on the left side of the room. If you've got a question or a technical question or a clarifying question about the presentation, we'll take those first, then we'll take the comments. So.
Yeah, I have a minor question on...
Actually, and one thing I forgot, if you could identify your name and where you're from or who you represent.
Sure. My name is Matthew Perlson. I'm a resident of the North End, and I live on Fulton Street with my family. My question was on slide 41. I think I saw something that said a conservancy or a botanical garden over the site that said that there weren't any building loads there. And I was just wondering, is there enough there for a conservancy or a greenhouse like it shows on the slide, or was I mistaken?
Shall I jump? The loading that was allowed for on parcel 18 was just for, as Lauren said, the planning was for initially just a kiosk, a very low kiosk building, nothing on that order. Doesn't mean it can't be done. It means you can't just like land willy-nilly right on the ramp wall. So you might have to get a little more clever about how you bring those loads down to a structure that'll bear them.
Can you just define what a kiosk is? I'm thinking of the carts in Faneuil Hall.
It would be a building, probably
the cafe.
Elm Street Cafe
in the post office.
That was what was conceived of. The loads that's designed to carry are fairly limited. Doesn't mean something more can't be done, but it's not necessarily possible.
Sign names. 2 questions. They relate to the issue that was touched on, that there was money set aside by the legislature, I believe, and you can tell us the amount. I don't remember what it was. So one question is that money still available? And the second question is, if it is available or not available, is that what sets the eventual budget for whatever is discussed in terms of, we'll call it for these purposes, covering the ramps? So those are the 2 questions.
I can answer the first question for you, Si. It was $31 million total for all 3 ramps, at least $16 million of which was set aside for parcel 6. That money is no longer available. Having had the proposals withdrawn on all 3 parcels, after a year or 2 of waiting, the Treasurer's Office swept it back into the general fund. So it would have to be reappropriated if it were to be made available again.
Okay, and the second part of the question is, since it isn't there anymore, has there been any discussions either at the MassDOT or legislature, which appropriated the original money, of any kind of budget, because when you start talking about coverage and design and so on, it's like anything. If I've got X million, you can do certain things with it. If I have not X million, and I have some other number, that sets kind of the tone of what one can expect. So I wondered if you could give any parameters or any input to that question.
We brought Steve McLaughlin here just to answer that question.
That was the easy one. No, the planning study and future design are funded, and money is available to do that through the Metropolitan Highway System. To get us through the planning study, eventual design. We don't know at this time yet what we're going to construct. We don't know what the budget would be. We'll have to look again to see where that would come from. There's nothing specifically identified, because frankly, we don't know what it is. But through this for the next several months and into design.
Yeah, the study part, that's the cheap money, as we call it.
Before I go on, I know the rep.
Yeah, I have to throw another offense, but I apologize and thank you for taking me out of turn. Aside, first off, the money was reallocated during the economic downturn of like 2009, 2010. Myself and Senator Petrocelli fought very hard to try to keep that in, but when we didn't have anything, that we were hanging on to because there was nothing really moving at the time, it became a lot harder fight to maintain that money. But it's something that we will fight for in the future. If it's something that can help move the process along. But obviously, no guarantees as there was before. I want to also just first before I say anything else, I want to thank Mass DOT and the BRA for putting this together today. I appreciate the history lesson. I know a lot of you have been involved in this process for a lot longer than I have, and I appreciate your commitment to this. We've been now basically about a little over maybe 10 years now of having the artery down, and I think with a couple bumps on the road, it's been a success. I mean, the Greenway is a success. Everything along it is very vibrant. It's very great for our neighborhoods that surround it. I would say though that these 3 parcels of land, more so 6 and 12 in my opinion, are eyesores and something that needs to be tackled at some point in time. And I think it's like Lauren said, it's nice that we have now maybe some fresh eyes and a new opportunity to try to talk about what actually should go there. I've maintained over the since we started talking about this that I have no preconceived notion going into this. I know what we had there originally designed. The neighborhoods were very, very in support of those projects. Those didn't work out, but I have no preconceived notions on what should end up going there now that we're back to square one, starting over with this process. And I hope that we all can have that mentality going into this, because I think it is important in terms of keeping an open mind on what would actually succeed down there. I'm trying to think what else. Lastly. As I know, we've been talking about this a long time, and I saw that the MEPA report was from 1990. The one thing if I was going back to talk to my 12-year-old self and ask them what exactly I would want to see in the MEPA report, is that we talked about the noise and the air pollution issue, and if that could be something that no matter where we go in this discussion, that is still kept within the discussion, because I think that is as important to the community as anything else, because that is something that as those ramps have been there, that is one thing that has really been a nuisance to a lot of the residents that live directly along those, especially 6 and 12. And so I'd like to make sure that even though that wasn't in the original MEPA report, or isn't, and I know you guys are very clear about that, I'd like to make sure that is still part of what we talk about. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And I just want to state that we share the same thoughts of hitting the reset button, and we come with no preconceived notions of what should be there. Other than I will reiterate that Parcel 18 looks pretty good to me, but that's not. But honestly, we are coming here to look with a fresh set of eyes, and we're glad that you shared that with us. With that, I'm going to go. I know Mr. Frateroli.
Mr. Frateroli, Endicott Street. For Parcel 6, you said something about decking. What kind of material is that going to be, or when you say decking, what do you mean by decking?
The decking, so the decking on the computer.
It'd be, some sort of concrete steel structure. I defer to the engineers on that. It'd have to obviously hold itself up and hold up any soil loads and, ability to drive a truck across it to maintain it. I mean, it would be a substantial structure. It wouldn't just be like a flimsy shade over the thing. It would actually have to be something you can traverse and
like lighting things on it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Like anything, it would have to be designed. I mean, whatever is decided to be placed on that parcel would have to be considered a design. And the design would have to, just much like you're designing a house and dealing with snow loads and people walking in your house, that deck is going to have to be designed to accommodate whatever's going to be on it.
Gentleman in the back.
Hi, I'm Fort Cavallari from Battery Street, also Vice President of the North End Waterfront Residents Association. I wanted to ask, parcels 12 and 18, if you could liken them to unsightly mine entrances, particularly parcel 12. But parcel 8 is like a horrific strip mine operation with exposed high rods, cement clearly unfinished, not six. It seems that there may be some more urgency. I want to ask from an engineering point of view if there's more urgency in getting a solution there than the other parcels, because it does seem like something from a Final Destination movie if you get up and close to the finish of that particular parcel.
The reason that there are exposed rebars there and it is unfinished is because we were preparing to have the YMCA there. We were very far in conversations. Those pockets were where they were going to land their beams. The re-rods were how they were going to be locked, tied in. And when they didn't go forward, we had taken the leap of faith and actually put project money into accommodating their structure. So when it didn't happen, that has been there. And we agree that needs to be cleaned up, and well in advance of anything ever being done as a result of this process, that's something we're looking at getting cleaned up, getting those rods cut off and getting things finished out there, at least to a presentable state until a permanent solution is done.
I actually rode the area with our district highway director probably less than 2 weeks ago, and he shares the same sentiment that he's not controlling this process, but he can control what it looks like today, and so hopefully we can get some of that cleaned up, irregardless of this process.
I just want to make it It was our time to run across the room.
Francine Gannon, 74 Commercial Street, abutted to parcel 12. Again, I just want to reiterate what the representative said. I didn't realize you were 12 years old then. But really, it's great that there's a fresh set of eyes looking at this, and I thank you, the only youth, the old face, Bill Tuttle and yourself. But just prior to the meeting, just a little bit of an update. Mostly everybody in this room knows, but when we went back to 2012 and it was designated as a development parcel, thanks to then Representative Sal Macy and then Senator Bob Travellini, who gave us some funding to do our own independent study to see what, if anything, could be built. Because at the time, the VRA was strictly against a park being done on parcel 12. And what we did is we hired and interviewed several architectural teams. I just want to give you the background as part of the presentation. And we selected 2 wonderful architects. One was a commercial architect, the other was a landscape architect who taught, by the way, at Harvard and who was familiar with the homestead study and the parks and whatever. That is the report. There's only 3 copies left. Bobby has 1, I have 1, and Danny knows what, I think Victor has the other. And I believe Danny gave you his copy. Okay, and that's all we have left. We had 50 copies made, and just 2 with that study.
Like he has 1.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say. By the way,
Ron knows that my life depends on that copy.
No, that's my copy.
That's Bobby's copy. But along with the money that was given to us by the legislature to do the study, each homeowner along Commercial Street put in $1,500 of their own money so that we got this done professionally and whatever. Also, too, I gave the group a little breakdown of what was the determination also. I'm just asking, with the fresh eyes that you have, Please read that, just get an idea what was done. There was a survey, it was done with 3 proposals for a building on the spot, 3 proposals for a park land on the spot. Of course, there were numerous meetings, and the community stood very, very well behind a park on the spot. And I'm just going to say with open eyes, take a lesson from Chicago. They have a Millennium Park that runs over 15 miles. And you know what? There's not one building on that park. We have a Greenway Conservancy. What is it, Danny, 1.2 miles? What's the Conservancy? If that, it's just, I think, over a mile. There shouldn't be any buildings built along the Conservancy. When we first learned about it, it was supposed to be 75% green space, 25% building or construction. If you take just the north end, that's reversed. All we get from the north end section is 25% green space and 75% construction. So I'm just saying, think open eyes. We're back in the 21st century. Think about the open space and what people envision along that greenway. And then we'll talk about possibilities, what could go there. Because we had a grand idea. Had we gone ahead with them, it probably would have been developed today as a park.
Thank you. Yeah, along the new Commercial Street. Did I read you right when you said that the southbound side of the tunnel on Parcel 12 was not thickened up? It was my understanding all these years that both sides, the northbound side and the southbound side, were thickened up for a building.
My understanding, Robbie, and needs to be confirmed, is that the south side wasn't, and what it is a question of historical timing. When the original planning was done for what strengthening of the structures would be needed for what would happen on top of them, that southbound ramp wasn't there. It was over on the outside sidewalk next to the Dock Square garage. Only after that was put in place was there a redesign that moved that ramp into Parcel 12. And my understanding is at that point, it was not designed to pick up the loads. It can be spanned over. What it means. I'm sorry?
That throws a wrench in any building.
Only if you actually land on the ramp structure. If you land 5 feet away and go past it to what's below it, you can still do it.
I was always aware that it was.
Yeah, I don't believe so. I might be wrong, but I don't believe so.
Jane Forrestal, I live in the West End, and I've been on the impact advisory groups for many of the buildings that are in the Bullfinch Triangle, including the Government Center Garage. And when these studies were originally done, Government Center Garage was not thought to be redeveloped at that point in time. Bullfinch Triangle was not developed, even though we knew that there was going to be open space after the artery and the Green Line came down. There's still one more building to be built within the Bullfinch Triangle. And there's a lot of buildings to be built at the Government Center Garage with a lot of residential property, in both of those structures. So I think that if we look at this, we have to think about what would the residents, new residents, not just those of us who already live here, but new residents, wouldn't it be more conducive to them, since there's not a lot of green space in the area, in that neighborhood at all? Wouldn't it be much better to look at the Parcel 6 as a green space, whether it's for a playing field of some sort of a playground for children, just some place that children can go to, adults can go to. If you look at the North End parks now, they're packed on the weekends. They're packed. And just people want to just have a place to sit in the sun. The kids play in the fountains. We need more of that area, that type of usage for Parcel 6 in particular.
So we've totally gone off of my plan of technical questions, right? So that's all right. I'll come back to you. So anybody with specific technical questions, and then we'll go into this is what I'd like to see. All right. David, go right down.
My first question has to do with your statements that early in actually it was Mr. Tuttle's statement that landscaping would comply with the cover requirement, and then your statement that it does in fact comply with the cover requirement at Parcel 18. Is there a certification of some kind or a decision of some kind that gives you an assurance that that is the case? That's my first question. My second question is, I've forgotten the Greenway study, but I believe it kind of ignored those 3 parcels. now that those 3 parcels are being looked at and planned, will they be integrated into the Greenway study? And will any rezoning of the corridor await the decisions that we make with these parcels that might potentially affect the decisions that were made earlier about the parcels along the sides? So how would this be integrated, if at all, into the Greenway corridor study before any of the recommendations are codified into zoning?
I'm going to see if I can try and answer your question. It's a little bit complicated. I mean, when we did the Greenway study, we may not have formally been able to say, yeah, these might not be buildings, but we certainly considered if they were buildings or if they were park parcels. And what we have codified for the corridor so far have generally been, guidelines that promote activation in the parks. So if these all end up being landscaped parks, I don't think we would need to revisit anything per se. But that's something we're aware of and we'll take into consideration as we move forward.
To your first question, Dave, I don't believe that there's anything in the MIPA record that says that blesses the landscaping we have on parcel 18 is fulfilling that coverage commitment. And that is part of what this process is to do, is to come up with an answer to take forward jointly to MIPA and say, this is what we plan to do on 6, 12, and 18. And as John said, maybe what's there out there is sufficient and everyone's happy with it, maybe not. We'll find that out in this process. But come to some consensus on what people believe is now the best thing to do, and then carry that forward to MIPA and get their blessing so we can close that commitment out one way or another.
Thank you.
Victor Brown in North End, and this is a technical question because it addresses the 14-foot 6-inch clearance. My memory, which goes back to what Francine was speaking of, which was in 2002, 14 years ago, the study that was made. It seemed to me, if I recall correctly, that the height, after the clearance is allowed for, that you have further heights that are determined by signage. That is, if you look at the ramps now, what's exposed are signs, and so a constraint is the height that the Federal Highway Department requires for signage. But I have also noticed signs of different heights. That is, there are big ones and there are smaller ones. And I wonder, as the consultants are looking at this, whether attention can be paid at when can you use the lower height sign so that the ultimate height of the deck is lower than it would be if you had to comply with the higher height sign.
Certainly, that's exactly the kind of stuff that we're going to be looking to define as the study goes forward. Take a look at those requirements, the regulations, the standards that would have to be implemented for that type of highway system, sight distance, speeds, all of that stuff, that all plays into that. Yes. Thanks.
Hi, Dave Goggins, North End resident. My question is clarifying. As I haven't had a chance yet to read the relevant language in MIPA, I'm relying on what I've heard tonight in your presentation, and I'm wondering what exactly, there may not be an exact answer to this, but what is the purpose, the stated purpose in MIPA of putting in coverages to the 3 ramp parcels, other than, I think you referred to something called mitigating environmental blight? And is it your interpretation that we're required to put in coverages, even if the only purpose to putting in coverage is to put a building up in that space?
It is not to put up a building. What it is, and it honestly is, there's very little verbiage to tell you that. And I'll read it again. Highway ramps on parcel 6, 12, and 18 must be covered to mitigate their impacts on the surface environment. That is the extent of it. It doesn't say anything beyond that. We know that it doesn't, not required for air quality, because the tunnels as they are now, with the portals where they are now, were tested and passed air quality standards and passed noise standards. It really is about aesthetics and how you experience that environment.
So if at the end of this process, as John may have suggested with parcel 18, if the conclusion of the panels and the community is that putting a cover there wouldn't enhance the aesthetics of of the space, is that an option not to put a cover, or are you required by law to put covers?
We're required by this to cover it, and the extent of it is what I just read to you. It doesn't really say what.
It doesn't say cover like physical, put a lid on it.
Yeah.
It doesn't say that. That's because that's what everybody thinks of when they hear cover, is that a physical lid. It doesn't say that. And so what we would be doing is going back to MIPA and saying, to meet the commitment that we have, the BRA, Mass DOT, and the public have put together a tripartite process as we are required to do by MIPA. And here is our answer to cover for each of the 3 parcels, and we want you to bless that so we can go forward with it and say we've met the commitment of cover. So that's what our goal is.
In the original instance on 6 and 12, the assumption was, because it was what was in the plan, that was again, the zoning and the MIPA process were going hand in hand. So they informed each other, and the zoning plan is in the MIPA commitments. The assumption was in that plan that 6 and 12 would be buildings, and they therefore would cover the ramps physically. That clearly didn't work, at least not the way we all had hoped it would. So that's why we're going back to square one to see what will work.
John, I don't want to go out of order, but some of the commitments say absent of development, the ramp should be covered with decking, which I know we may not want, but there is an obligation to do something like that, and maybe we could use the money that would accomplish that to do something much better. But I think in one of the environmental commitments, it says that if development wasn't feasible, that they were to be covered with decking, which is a very expensive proposition. And maybe we can use those funds to do something better, like landscaping or a park or some other type of treatment. But that is in one of the commitments, which I don't have handy with me, but I have read that.
If you find something that speaks specifically to decking, please let me know, because my understanding is that this really is, it just says cover. And that's open to a federal interpretation. No question, though, that it also says that if we can't get federal funds to do it, that it's on our nickel to do it. There's no question about that.
And the other question I had is, in keeping with I'm Dan Guzzo on Commercial Street, in keeping with the commitment of Fresh Eyes, have all of the previous designations been revoked or terminated? Yes. They have.
They've all withdrawn formally.
Okay, and the last comment, in keeping with someone had said earlier about priorities of the different parcels, I feel the parcel 12 being in the middle of the Greenway is equivalent to a front tooth, and I think it deserves as much consideration as any parcel.
Along that, I'll just add that in the recent bond bill for transportation funding, Senator Petroselli and Representative Mikowitz has actually, the MIPA commitment has no time frame on it, but in the recent bond bill, the representative and the senator have put in that parcel 12 needs to be, they use the term capped, again without a definition, by November of 2017. So there is that date that's out there. The others have no date from MIPA. So we're cognizant of that as well as we move through this. Any other technical clarifying questions about the thing? I know, I'm sorry. And then we're going to go to the fun stuff after this, okay?
Matt Burleson from Fulton Street. Can somebody explain why the other on-ramps just to the east or the southeast of Hanover Street by North Street, why those aren't being covered or why they're not part of this?
Callahan?
Yes.
From a technical perspective, I always understood, and I was hearing the second hand when I was at the artery, that there needed to be a break in the ventilation systems there, because you have one ventilation system in the Callahan and Sumner tunnels, and then you have a separate ventilation system, and if you close them completely in, they get mixed up.
That's not accomplished by the giant vent building right next to it?
There's one vent building that is running the tunnel ventilation, the harbor tunnels, and then there's another ventilation system running the central artery tunnels.
Separate.
And absent a break, they're going to start interfering with each other. That's what I understood. There was, however, I should say, there was allowance for some coverage of those made. We did look at doing buildings that would cover at least near the portals on those. It was not, however, a MIPA commitment. It's something I would look at again, but to be honest with you, I think it's going to be difficult to get a developer interested in building on those, to be perfectly honest, because of the height limits and the structural demands of covering it.
A question on the ventilation issue. When you, in the issue of, say, covering the ramps, assuming that even happens, was the ventilation assumption made when the ventilation design, so that if it's decided to cover the ramps in any way, you don't have to deal with added ventilation? How has that been resolved? In the case of the buildings, when they were proposed, they had to deal with the ventilation as well as all the structure. So I'm wondering what happens now, assuming there are no buildings, there certainly aren't any now, and if it's to remain as open space and you'd like to cover those ramps, what happens with the ventilation? Or is that part of the cost of covering the ramps?
Sure. Sure. I'm advised by John to keep this in a summary fashion, because we will get into this a lot. Rock and Company will in the fall when we look at parcel by parcel. The gist of it, though, is that the first point is that whether a building or landscape deck covers something, cover is cover. And if it's completely closed in on 3 walls, you've essentially extended the tunnel. And that needs to be dealt with in terms of ventilation. Long story short, the existing conditions were in fact tested, everything passed muster, otherwise we never would have been able to build it the way it is. There was also some testing of the coverage scenarios. So for instance, on parcel 6, when you see our friend Bill Lindemulder's design of that ramp, those distances that are covered are the amounts that can be covered without additional ventilation, except for perhaps the addition of 1 jet fan under 1 ramp, which is a fairly minor lift.
We'll go into more detail.
Yeah, there's a lot more detail on that side, but it's best done in the context of it. Yeah. But there was some looking done at it. It's not a slam dunk that you can just cover the whole darn thing in each case, but there was some.
They're different from
each ramp is different. Each ramp is different. Yes. Right. Any more technical questions? Absolute technical. Yes.
At one point in time, there was an issue with the fact that the soil wasn't deep enough for the trees that were to be planted on a few of the parcels, not necessarily the ramp parcels, but within the Greenway. So when we're talking about, let's say there's a cover on one of the ramps, you've got 14 feet, plus what? Plus how many more feet will you have to put in?
Plus 3+ feet for signage, if signage needs to go there. And there are shorter versions of signs, but again, the Roxanne, you got to go through the technical analysis to see whether you can do it or not. Plus the depth of the structure, those beams have to have a certain depth to them, plus the slab, plus if you're going to put soil on, you have to have enough depth of the soil. So very quickly, 14.6 to the bottom of the structure can easily become like 5 feet.
Right, so that would mean huge mounds in the middle of the Greenway.
Right.
Or, yeah.
Which is a design consideration that we're going to put in the fall.
All right, to the fun stuff now.
No, John, can I have one more technical question? In following up on Victor's comment about the signage that's above the ramps and it meets federal highway requirements, and I think I heard the gentleman sitting at the table that you review all those requirements. But I think what's important to know is there are signs within the tunnels that don't meet federal highway requirements, that waivers were gotten to bypass the federal guidelines. And I think that's the type of effort we need when we look at the signs on top of the ramps that are equivalent to the signs that you see on 128 that don't belong in the city environment if it remains open. But more importantly, if we decide to cover, it takes away a lot of the challenges of bringing the cover much lower to accomplish other goals.
Sorry, John, we're going into the fun stuff.
John McQuaid, Louisville Streets in one Boston. We all agree, I think, that this is a quality of life urban asset, and now exists in a real context, partially built, it's partially completed. To go back to, say, Bob O'Brien, way back when, I encourage us to think as we move forward of this, not just how to improve the strip, but as to how it really works cohesively and integrates with the edges and the neighborhoods, and to suggest that we might have some on-site charrettes that might help help visualize and even obtain the goals within that context. A place, or a service that I think we did use, it might have been in the parcel 9, was Project Public Places. So just putting that out there as a suggestion to keep the cohesiveness and help set the goals in the context.
I should stand because I was always, all those years told, speak up, Ann. I'm Ann Fanton. I used to represent the Central Artery Environmental Oversight Committee, and even though they no longer exist, I maintain an interest in a few things, and this is one of them. I wanted to go, if Bill agrees, and not if he doesn't, because Bill, of course, goes back further than anyone, back further in history on Parcel 18. I looked it up a little bit, as well as I could from my old records. I believe that the Central Artery Project had been planning to use landscaping. A lot of the language in the EIR said landscaping may be used. It did not go into the MIPA decision, I agree. But it was largely with reference to Parcel 18, which, as you said, is an open space parcel that would need to be changed for something like the Center for Arts and Culture. The early design showed that. I don't know if it was prior to the completion task force or even during the early years of the Central Artery Completion Task Force. And then this idea for the Center for Arts and Culture, originally called something else, came up and was embraced by most people. And I believe about that time, the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, it may have been Jim Hunt at that time. I think it was when Jim Hunt was still Secretary, I may be wrong there, told City Hall and the project, I want 18 covered as well. I may have those out of sequence. In other words, that may have been before the building came along. And so the idea that 18 would be covered in much the same way that we were thinking at the time, 6 and 12 would be covered, sort of was generated, and the project, we all moved along those lines. I kept harping on, wait a minute, 18 is an open space parcel. I think when you get to the point of making recommendations, you go back to some of the earlier language, granted it isn't the binding commitment language, you'll see that 18 was talked about as really a park parcel. And granted it isn't as pretty as the one below it, but you can make a good case to keep it as it is. The complication there, I think, is that the legislation, the last bit of major legislation that applied to the corridor, designated those 3 ramp parcels as falling under the Conservancy, but should they be developed, I think they were meant to be transferred, so it may be in the Conservancy's interest to divest themselves of 18 as well as 6 and 12, so I don't know whether that's going to be a complicating factor, because they're maintaining it now as a park parcel, but it wasn't intended to be. So I hope you will find a way to make the case that I think was made earlier, that 18's really just should be kept as
It's
open
green on the
space.
map, and the others are red.
What I mean is, I think there always was that difference.
The only thing that I'll add, Ann, is that, and I don't want to get into the particulars with the Greenway, but the Greenway has a lease with Mass DOT, and in that lease, we agree on which parcels that is in the lease, but they're not like designated like a developer was designated. It's a different, so they don't need to de-designate themselves or anything like that. It's a lease agreement between us and them, and parcels are able to be moved if necessary, but it's not the same as like the Boston Museum project that we designated them parcel 12 and then they need to be de-designated.
The only thing I would add is you have such limited resources now. I encourage you to focus on 6 and 12.
Feel free to repeat that. Ma'am.
Hi, my name is Alex Phillips. I'm a Master of City Planning student, so I have no real stake in this. I'm just interested, and I have a couple of thoughts after hearing this presentation. So first, we've talked a lot about how, you'll have to build up high. So, and I think this kind of goes to, I believe your name is John's point about kind of how the pedestrians will interact. So I think as you cover it, yeah, as you travel along the Greenway, that will help the pedestrian experience, but as you look from the sides of it, you're going to have these massive walls. So I just wonder if there's an opportunity there for public art or just some sort of decorative wall there to at least help that situation. And then the second thought I had is, you know, if the point is really to have a greenway, whether you build a park or a building, just to keep that continuity, you know, would you require some sort of green roof, other green infrastructure on those sites? I don't know how you'll handle that.
Very good.
And where are you a student?
I'm at Penn, but I have every intention of coming back here.
My regards to Gary.
I just want to reiterate, you know, we work hand in hand with the Rose Kennedy Greenway. We met with them before this, and we will continue to meet with them as this.
Laura's actually got her hand up.
Oh, all right, Laura. So
Hi, sorry.
segue to Laura.
Laura Jasinski, I work in the Planning and Design Department for the Rose Kennedy Greenway Conservancy. And just wanted to be sure Jesse Brackenberry, our Executive Director, wanted to send his regrets. He had a longstanding commitment to the Boston Harbor Island Alliance Gala tonight. And Linda Jonash, our Director of Planning and Design, to a ULI conference. So we are certainly very excited to be partners in this, having some operating experience over the past couple of years and experimentation experience, and just wanted to be sure to express that, our enthusiasm to be a partner.
Thank you.
Stephanie Hogue, North End resident. I want to follow up on your comment about the development projects that we now know are going to be occurring in our immediate area, which are going to add a lot more residents to a community that is already very densely packed. The North End, as has been said, doesn't have a lot of open space. It's very, very dense, and we get a lot of tourist use, frankly, of a number of our parks. So I would hope that as this goes forward, we seize the opportunity with parcels 12 and 6 to create more space that meets residential need, because this is probably the last, or certainly in the near future, last opportunity to add more open space. I haven't been to all the meetings of the developments, but the ones that I did attend, it was pretty clear that little to no additional public space was going to be created with these projects, and yet it's going to add thousands more people to this area. Thank you.
Okay, David and then John.
Dave Kubiak, North End again. Building on, I think it was John McQueen's statement, I am concerned about visual corridors across the corridor, the Central Artery corridor. So it would be good to see from many different perspectives, looking both directions, what can we see now, and what do we want to preserve of what we see now. Another issue is pedestrian movements, really critical across the Greenway, especially in the areas of these parcels. And one of the concerns I have, and I don't want you to infer from this that I ignore don't walk signals, but when you cover a ramp like that, it almost becomes like the egress from a parking garage. And we know what we have to do at egresses to parking garages. You put in all sorts of beepers and lights and everything else. You can now see cars coming up the ramps, and you will not be able to see them possibly when they're covered. And again, I don't violate don't walk signals. But anyway, public safety, I think, is a concern. And my last concern is air quality. It needs to be the subject of a huge forum at some point, separate from any of this discussion. But air quality along the corridor is so important to me. I think some of the developments, especially the Government Center Garage development, will affect the circulation of air around the vent shafts. And I wonder whether it will compromise the dispersion of the pollutants and instead send more of those pollutants into our residential neighborhoods. Putting in buildings on these parcels might also compromise or worsen air quality conditions.
Thank you. John.
Brian Webb, live on Henchman Street, and I'm a civil engineer. I think the beauty of the North End
is that you have such a vibrant life and community mixed in with such a rich history, and I would like to see that mirrored in Parcel 6 particularly is what I focused on. I think it sounds like everyone is liking the idea of some open parkland, and I know there are some structural things that we'll have to do to raise the land, and I was just thinking of mixing in a little history to kind of help that. You had mentioned some art potentially. We're closing in on the 100th anniversary of the Great Molasses Flood. I'm sure some of you guys remember that. 21 people lost their lives. And so what I kind of was envisioning is just taking that tank dimensions, which I think was 90 feet by 50, flipping it on its side, be about 40 feet high, 50 feet wide, having a nice arch right over that park, maybe a little water area in the back, maybe convert that to a nice skating rink come the wintertime, but just like an open area that has kind of a mark, has that historic flair there, and I think it'd be a great addition right in front of Haymarket Station, something that kind of can mix in the history with the parkland, combine those two things to make it work.
Thank you very much.
Dominic Pizzo. I've been involved in this process since the Fred Salvucci days and gone to many meetings. I want to echo Dave Kubiak's comments and concerns about air quality, and particularly those construction projects with the garage, North Station, congestion. So it's important that you listen to us, you listen to the community, and please, we went through years and years and years of hardship. This should be our payback. This should be our payback. We should get something that really complements the community and provides, and I know you're all working towards that, but I just want to reinforce air quality, green space is what we're looking for.
Hi everyone, Leslie Horn, 12 Unity Street in the North End, also the president of RUF, Responsible Urbanites for FIDO. Our board is here. This is an issue that we've been following for over a year now. Parcel 12 is, in our opinion, underused and unloved space, and we would like to change that. We echo much of the sentiment of this room that we would like to keep it green space, 100%. We think a building we're not in favor of a building. We have proposals, we have maps and plans. We would like to make it an urban oasis, not just for dogs, but for families and people who come in, multi-use, bring arts and culture and history of the North End into this space. It's an awkward shape, and we have some great ideas, and the dogs are a problem in the North End with the very limited parks that we do have, and we think having a dedicated area where they can be will enhance the other parks that we have. So we'd like to spruce up this underloved parcel, make it greener than it is, and you know, let some families and dogs and residents really take advantage of this space. We hope that, you know, we believe that it would be a huge benefit to our neighborhood, not only helping a problem, but adding value to everybody, you know, who's living there, especially with all the buildings and the hotels and everything going in. It's only going to increase the amount of dogs in our neighborhood. So we very strongly feel that this parcel can be used in that manner, so.
John, you know, Tom touched earlier on the map, and we've seen many maps over the year of what's colored green, what's colored development, what's colored conservancy, what's colored mass highway. Has the time finally come for these ramp parcels to become part of the Greenway? Because when we talk to the Greenway about these parcels, and we embrace the type of things they're doing on the Greenway, they say, well, that's not our land, that's not part of our charge, that's not part of our real estate, it belongs to DOT. And when you talk about DOT, they talk about multi-jurisdictional, BRA, DOT, possibly considerations from the Greenway. Has the time finally come to designate these parcels as Greenway parcels?
So none of the parcels are designated, as I said before. We have a lease with the Conservancy. It's currently being, there are negotiations about a continuation of that lease. I will not go any further in the discussion than that. But I think, as was stated before, Parcel 12 currently, the Greenway Conservancy maintains that forest, and they actually do parts of, they do 18 as well. I don't want to forget that. That's almost a given. And there is a couple of little landscape areas, I think right on Sudbury Street, that they maintain on Parcel 6 for us now. So we just don't want to get caught up in that word designated, because that doesn't exist.
I'll get away from designation, but like the gentleman from Penton Street said, he's interested in art. The Greenway does art, but they only do maintenance on the ramp parcels under your agreement. They can't explore the potential for art and all the other wonderful things they do on the Greenway.
Once we get through this process and it's determined that they, if they're determined to be open space, I'm sure we will further our discussions with the Greenway on that. But if they turn out to be a building, then it would not be something that we would maintain. That's kind of, you know, how that works between with us and them. That's kind of a separate thing. But I'm not picking on you, but picking on the word designated.
Yeah, no, I'll get away from designated, but you know, they're providing a maintenance service and nothing else, no planning, no possibility, no anything, because they're DOT, designated DOT development parcels still currently.
That's what this process is going to hopefully get to at the end. Nate, and then I'll take this lady here, and then Francie.
Nate Swain, I live in the North End. I would actually like to include the Callahan and Summit Tunnel both sections, at least in a study sense, to see what the distance that the ventilation systems need to be separated, and see if we could deck over them to add open space. I know some of them were designated development, but it would be great to just, now that we're talking about ramp sections, we should include those two, because it's all in the same subject.
We will not be including those in this thing.
President, West End Civics, President of the West End Civics Association, Angela Latondo. I noticed that you didn't talk about the aesthetic design of the innovation of the art design over the Rose Kennedy. I read about that. The BRA had something to do with that. Do you know anything about that? It was in the website, I noticed.
I'm not sure I'm following you. Could you repeat the question and be a little louder? So
there was a bright light over the Rose Kennedy
is that the art
project?
piece? You're talking about the art piece that the Greenway?
No one?
Was it in the paper yesterday?
Yeah, it was, innovation, art design, or you could see it over the, have you noticed it?
So that's a project that we're working on now.
Yeah,
for next year.
Beautiful.
It will be.
And they're thinking of 5 other projects to do.
Exactly.
And I mean, it was outstanding, so you didn't bring that up, but I just thought but as far as everything else, the aesthetic, we want to improve the partial 618 and all the rest is
612 and 8.
612 and 8, I think, you know, it's good, but it's $31 million is mentioned that it would cost to do that.
$31 million is money that was previously appropriated by the legislature for the nonprofits that were going to build at the time. That money is no longer there.
It's no longer there. So, like you said, we really don't have to do this. We're just doing a case study research on this. What do you anticipate it's going and its purpose, and how important is it?
Well, it's very important because we have a requirement that we have to provide a cover for these. And so the purpose of this planning study is to try to determine what exactly that cover will be, and then we need to go back to MIPA and present that to them so that we can fulfill the commitment that we're required, that us and the BRA are required to fulfill. So it's important, and if you put aside all of that technical reason why we have to do it, it's important for the neighborhood and for the community and for the surroundings of it, because at least someone had said 6 and 12 are a pretty good scars. So.
Yeah, support it.
Thank you. All right, so I had Danny, you go yours, Francine, you were next. So.
Yeah, Francine, I just want to add one more comment in support of possibly giving serious consideration to the ramp parcels becoming, parkland. What you see now there, you have to remember, along 11A, parcels 11A and 11B are developmental parcels as well. which means along Cross Street, there's going to be, that's going to be filled with development right to the end of North Street. So now we're talking about if 12, referring to parcel 12, if there's a development on parcel 12, you're now putting back a divider once again from what the north end and the other part of the, the city is. So we're going to have another means, not the ugly expressway, but you'll have another building along, along the Greenway. So that's all I'm asking. Think about what's going up in and around, and we'll be back in with all these buildings again. So I just want to make sure serious consideration is given to the bike. And also think too, because when we all had presentations back when architects came in and showed us what they built around the country and the like, I have to tell you, we disproved their own argument about not building on parcel 12, because some of parcel 12, when we had an architect who, like I said, given it the homestead effect, one of the largest segments, if you were to, the way it was built, it goes up, someone said the largest, but it's 19 feet high. If you were to go on parcel 12 and stand in the middle, you could see all the way to the north and all the way to the south. And what better way to have people when they're coming into the city? We've got the gorgeous carousel there that we have there, which is a signature piece on the artery, on the Conservancy. Why not have another signature park that extends, that you see from north to south, the whole Conservancy and the Greenway, as a lot of people thought they envisioned all green space. So that's all I'm trying to say, that keep the eyes open, consider just about everything, because we don't need to be divided once again, because with the expressway now, and then have buildings in between us, especially the new construction that's going on in government centers. What better thing to look along the Greenway? I just want to keep that in thought, because there's other buildings going up there, and it's nice to have the green space along the Conservancy, and it's flourishing now after the 5 years. You're starting to see the benefit of the Conservancy. They're doing a good job. Thank you.
My first question, I guess, is for Francine. If we could have permission to share that report that you have, or a copy of it electronically, and post it up with the rest of the documents.
So we're going to be, we're going to take that, and we're going to be showing, we just got it tonight.
Got it.
I knew it was coming about promising.
Okay. So Mass DOT has resources. Maybe they can upload it to their website, and we can view it electronically. They have a copy.
Great. And then
we'll talk with the BRA about that, because the website stuff's going to be on the BRA site.
Okay. I did have another comment to make, and that is I volunteer at the Spalding Rehabilitation Center on Fulton Street, and one thing I noticed is that patients who are recovering there don't have a lot of access to the Greenway. And so just something to either put on the record or just have for consideration is providing some green space for the patients.
And I'll take one.
Well, I was waiting for Nancy Caruso to speak, but I see that she's not here. And I remember, but I might be corrected by Nancy, Joanne is not sure she does. It must have been around the mid-90s, in the early discussion with the North End, that you may have been the liaison at that time, the North End Central Artery Task Force, whatever it was, showing illustrations, just rough depictions of what decking parcel 6 would look like as compared to the building.
You showed what?
We showed the deck, yes.
But what I also remember is that, granted, there's a whole new community in the North End. This is a whole new process, but at the time, seeing that and comparing it to what they hoped for, which was something like Y, they didn't like the decking. I was just going to suggest you could still find some of your old. It was a little more developed than that.
We have that study. Thankfully, sometime in the past, I scanned it, so we have it. I'm sorry?
No, it was Bill Lindemold that did a full study about the deck and the building.
He did it. And he looked, the one I have is only as the parcel 6, but he looked at both a building and an open space. And since we had interest in the building, that's what we went forward with. It turned out it didn't work out. So.
But I remember you didn't like the look of the decking. So obviously, as you get into this, then they feel that way.
The YMCA was very enticing. It was a very nice amenity that would have been with the neighborhood. So, Anybody else? Seeing none, thank you very much. I'll put that back up there in case you need to write it down before you go. Thank you. We will be in touch back over the end of September. Please send comments, ideas, thoughts to us while you're out there enjoying the other parks. And thank you again.